Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the 4th Annual Tree Summit. I hope you were able to get some coffee and some snacks. We are going to start to convene, and we are going to start our first small group discussion. We have some items in the middle of each table, and also if you happen to have seen the RSVP email, we asked you to bring an object with you to the tree summit that reminded you or represents your relationship with the urban forest. So to start off our tree summit, we would like you to share your object that you brought with other folks at your table. If you didn't bring one, there are some miscellaneous items in the center that you can choose from. If you're sitting by yourself, feel free to join a table with other attendees. And also make some introductions, your name, maybe why you came to the tree summit, if you've attended previous tree summits. Yeah, so we will be doing that for 10 minutes and then we will reconvene. And yeah, thank you everybody for coming here on a cloudy Saturday, proper fall morning. We appreciate your attendance and we look forward to beginning this tree summit. So yeah, have at it.
Hi, everyone. This is Betsy. Can anyone hear me?
Gotcha, Betsy.
Hey, Betsy.
Oh, okay. Hi. So I picked this leaf up off the ground. I'm in Warsaw, Poland on vacation. And I walked through Łazienki Park, which is a 188-acre park in this middle of the city. It's absolutely lovely. And it's about 120 football fields big, and there are tons of trees. It's very beautiful. All the leaves are, there's no leaf blowers. All the leaves fall in place. There's red squirrels, many variety of birds. It's very lovely. Anyway, I picked up this leaf to share with you all here today.
I've got a buckeye leaf, kind of honoring my great-grandparents who came out from Ohio. Great-grandpa came out to work for the iron company and stayed, and Cook's Butte is named after great-grandpa. And so we planted a buckeye tree for him and a yellow buckeye tree for great-grandma. And it's absolutely gorgeous this time of year.
I brought 2 books with me. I have The Overstory by Richard Powers, and then I have a book of essays by Kim Stafford, who is a local poet. And these 2 books just really ground me in the forest when I can't actually be outside. It's just like experiencing a bit of it while I'm indoors in bed. And I think both authors really have a really strong voice and give agency to trees and elements of nature in ways that I've not seen before. Would anyone else like to share? We've got about 5 minutes left.
I'll share. Hi, I'm Jessica Numanlu. I'm actually city staff for the city of Lake Oswego. And
Hi there,
I searched everywhere because I have this picture of a madrone tree. Actually, and I know Morgan Holland is here, and I've actually shared it with her because it is the biggest madrone tree I've ever seen. It is in my hometown, which is Langley, Washington, up on Whidbey Island. It is my beloved hometown. I love it. It will always be my home. And madrone trees are my favorite. They're all over the island. And it's a really special tree to me because it's at my elementary school. And we used to stand under it when we were waiting for the buses to pick us up. And it's also where they dropped us off. And even as a kindergartner, I was absolutely mesmerized by this madrone tree, which is, it is magnificent. And I just wish I could share the picture with you, but that's, I couldn't find it. So that's my story.
Thanks for sharing. I feel like I could see it even though you didn't actually have it on you.
Hi, I'm Nancy Matson. I don't live in Lake Oswego. I live in a suburb of Portland that's adjacent to Lake Oswego. I have a leaf I got off of Persian ironwood tree out in my front yard. Half of it is the beautiful normal fall color it gets. The other half is dead because, like a lot of trees in Portland and all over this year where it's so dry, we have leaves that just died rather than colored up and then fell. So I'm waiting for the rest of the green leaves on the tree to start getting their pretty fall color. They just haven't turned yet. It's just an unusual year leaf wise.
I have 2 Persian ironwoods street trees that I planted 8 years ago. They're beautiful. I love it.
They are, and they'll be huge. Mine is really, really big now. It's about, I'd say 15 years old and very, very tall, and they're very dense trees. Lots of branches.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Morgan Holen. I'm a private consulting arborist, and I really struggled with picking one object to bring to share. I thought about it, but the truth is I live, eat, breathe, sleep trees. Trees are my whole life as a consulting arborist and an urban forester. So everything around me has something to do with the urban forest, and it's just a pleasure to be here today. So good morning.
Hello? Hello?
Hi.
We can hear you.
You can? All right. My name's Lynn. I'm sorry my camera won't work. What I have is a couple of chunks of bark from 2 very large street trees that the Portland Department of Transportation just killed on my street. And I have them to remind myself if we're getting on the stick a little better earlier and maybe had more knowledge about how to go about it, might have saved at least one of them. So that's kind of why I'm here, to learn about that, even though I'm Portland, not Lake Oswego. Oh, one was an English walnut and one was a big linden. And as a result, we're going to have very hot summers from now on because all the pavement they shaded on is going to hit us, plus the direct sunlight very hard the next time we have a heat dome.
Lynn, do you know why they were removed?
Yes, because this street is part of a big project the city is doing, this whole area of northeast Portland. And the one that was near our house, that kind of had to go. It had a huge hole in it, so the health of it was in question. And if they didn't take it out, my roommate / landlord would have had to, and he does not have the thousands of dollars it would take to deal with a 40-foot tree. Plus, we were concerned an east wind might bring it down on the house. The English walnut, on the other hand, was on the south side of the street, but it had been there for a long time. And because no one trimmed a low branch a long time ago, there was a branch that was very low going over it. Plus the roots were pushing the sidewalk up under it. And as part of this project, the city has to make everything ADA compliant because they're getting a federal grant. And, you know, the thing that gets me is Blandine is a street that, at least at this part, is much wider than it has to be. They could have conceivably moved the sidewalk out further and left the tree there. But as I got into trying to deal with the City of Portland bureaus, which hopefully, I don't know if anybody's had that experience. It's not a lot of fun, but basically I just found out there was, no mechanism within the bureaucracy to try to get something like that done. So I'm feeling I really need to learn a lot to get up to speed to try to, save some of these street trees that they are taking out despite having a climate change
Okay,
policy.
hey, Zoom folks, we are going to reconvene and launch into our first presentation. I just want to thank you all for attending virtually, and thank you for being patient with us. This is our first hybrid event, and there are just some inevitable Zoom lag issues. And I would love if you have any audio issues, if you have any issues hearing the speaker, to please put it in the chat. Mary will let us know. We want to make sure that you have access to the presentation and can hear everything. It's just hard sometimes to know automatically that folks can't hear. So thanks for everyone for being on mute while there are presentations. We will have another small group discussion after this presentation, and I believe we will be putting you into breakout rooms, so that will make it a little bit easier. But yeah, if you have any issues with the audio or understanding what the question is or what's happening, please put that in the chat, and we will know and we will adjust. Yeah, thanks everybody.
So anyhow, so one of the things I'm a little bit about my background. I'm one of the people that got together and founded the Watershed Council. Thought it was really important that we look at issues around natural resources in our community. And that I did it when I was executive director over with the Friends of Tryon Creek State Park. And my reference point for when I think of an urban forest or a functional forest is Tryon. So when I think of nature, if I think of how things are going and what's happening in a natural setting, that's my reference point. And it's right next door to where we are. And our homes and stuff actually extend from that. So thinking about how our urban forest is actually an extension of a novel ecosystem that actually supports the soil and all the animals that live here, and just thinking about what it is that we need to have, that we have a healthy ecosystem, right? In our suburban setting. But as we think about what that did, I think it's really important that we think about where did our ideas around how we take care of urban settings actually come from, right? How do we take care of nature? What were those ideas? How did those happen? How has this land been taken care of over time? So when you think that there were first people who lived here, right? There were people that lived with this land. There's studies that have been done. We know that they use fire to maintain the land. We know that they actively managed, that the land supported them, and it wasn't just salmon in the rivers, but the water had to be healthy. But they actually took care of the land and depended on that land to feed and take care of them. Not much different than we are today. We just kind of do it on a bigger scale, right? But the land is supporting us, right? So there were first people that lived here, and they lived here it keeps getting longer. When I first heard about, when they thought it was 10,000 years, it's over 20,000 years that people have been living and taking care of and managing and thinking about how this land helped to support them. So one of the things that we want to do in Watershed Council, we actually had an opportunity to Mike Buck and Jack Halsey, our executive director, actually found an artifact when they were out looking at one of our restoration sites. And so I want to invite Mike up to kind of share what that experience meant to how we think about this land.
Good morning. So
You
what
need
can
to
we?
be in front of the.
Oh, need to be in front. So what can we find together this morning? So Jack and I found this crafted obsidian projectile point, 6,000 to 8,000 years old, older than, it's kind of, not too often you can hold something older than the pyramids in your hand. We have 3 R's as our theme today: reverence, renewal, and reciprocity. But these rely on another R, respect. In this land acknowledgement, we cultivate a disposition of how we see ourselves related to each other and our environmental heritage. Respect places us in an open, vulnerable, learning presence as we look upon critical issues together, face to face. It forms the basis of our relationship, where we can listen and hold both old and new narratives, possibly some that have been closed by a rather limited historical rendering. By recognizing that this land, our land now, the land we belong to, was sacred to many peoples before us, this testament becomes a more precious keepsake for our own care and belonging. By opening up dialogue, we engender hope for a new vision and our own creative role. And another R, resourcefulness. Thank you.
And a part of that too, we want to remember that there was harm done to the original people who lived here. And that we need to hold those stories and share those stories and honor that commitment to the land. And that's one of the things that we're really working on and thinking how we're going to continue to do that in the future. But so there were first people who lived on this land. And then people came from another continent. So colonization started in the Americas. And there was a type of thinking that developed called manifest destiny. It was the go west young man, that the land is here for you to take, and the land is yours to take what resources you can from the land. And the land was worked up not as a part that you were a partner with the land, or that the land, in a way it was supporting you if you were a farmer, but even the farming people would farm out areas and move to a new area. Trees were cut and they moved to a new area. So there was this feeling of manifest destiny, that this was given to me, right? This was mine to be able to use as I see fit. And that kind of predominated. That was certainly the basis for the land grant program, when land people could actually were given land, with maybe not acknowledging that maybe somebody else had been taking care of it first. And we started thinking about the names that we have that were the land grant people around Lake Oswego, and how that commitment went. But it was the idea that we were taking land. And as this land was being taken and there were changes that were being made because of the way the land was being used, people became aware that maybe we can't keep doing it this way. You know, that if this land does support us, but there needs to be some reciprocal part of how we look at it. And so starting with actually in the late 1800s, and then building up, and I have a quote from Aldous Leopold, but people started to realize that there had to be an ethic about how we took care of the land, that we needed to be involved, that we needed to kind of listen to the land and figure out how we are taking care of the land. And so our thinking about natural resources and how we took care of things started to shift. And that really reached ahead of developing this land ethic with the work that in the early 20th century, that with Leopold and the work that he did. And then that even evolved further, because then we developed an environmental ethic.
They can't see the slides online, so I'm just gonna stop share and reshare, but you can.
Okay.
Sure.
So then this is hybrid stuff. Sorry,
Maybe
guys.
Hallie.
So then that environmental ethic, because right after World War II, we started to see the effects of DDT and Rachel Carson published Silent Spring. We'd been gathering information about what our effect was, that we needed to really, really think about what we were doing to the land. So that land ethic kind of evolved in environmental ethic. How are we really taking care of all those, all the creatures that are affected by what we're doing? And so this is where I grew up, right? And many of us were really affected by this environmental ethic and thinking about how we move forward and how we think about the land. And that the land isn't just mine, but it's something that goes beyond an individual. And so out of that came this feeling that instead of people being here and nature being here, that we're really part of each other. So we really are, you know, nature and humanity are tied together. And it's something that goes back to some of the ways and the myth and how the first people thought about the land. They considered the land an extension of themselves. And we got away from this feeling that man and nature are two separate things, but they actually blend and they come together. And I think this is a big part of how we're starting to think of the land now, and actually how that thinking is going to affect the land and what our future relationship is in the land as we go forward. So I think this is a really, knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. So really acknowledging that you are a part of this, of our natural ecosystems. And part of what we do with that is developing a community mindset that natural resources aren't belonging to individuals, but they're a community asset. And what I do on my land actually affects everybody else. And those resources go way beyond what we are as that we need to be thinking in terms of this asset in a community way. And the other thing that we need to develop is a lens for how we think about our natural resources. What is that when we make decisions on how we take care of something? What is that lens? What do we need to have in the back of our minds all the time as we move forward and we start to take care of things? So it's hard to read this here. So we need to think about this. I have to stay here. I just can't read it. There we go. How do we, I don't know, did I just screw something up?
Can you read it? Is that easier? Do you want me to?
No, it was just, I needed the angle. I couldn't see it with the lighter stuff. Okay, so we need to take care, we need to be thinking about that lens. So when we do something, what is it doing to the soil? Right? How is it interacting with the soil? What are we taking care of that biodiversity of all those little microorganisms and stuff that actually until about 30 years ago, people didn't even think about, right? So how are we actually really taking care of that? Are we thinking about the quality of the air? What are we doing that's protecting the air? And we can think of a lot of things that, like using probably getting away from internal combustion engines, right? You know, so are we thinking about the air quality and then honoring the job that our biomass, our trees and all of our plants are doing to actually improve our air and to supply oxygen? Are we looking at water quality? Are we looking at what is the impact of all the things that are growing out there on what happens? How fast do they slow down that rain? How do they let rain actually gather in the soil, and we build up enough reserves so that we have streams that run in the summer during our drought times? How are we taking care, and how does that ecosystem help support water? Are we honoring the diversity of all the different plants and animals that live here? So it's easy to think about. We can look out, and we've got, like at Tryon, we had 5 main trees, right? And that wasn't all our diversity, right? When you think about all the layer, under that, all the plants that live there, and all the herbaceous plants on the thing, there's a tremendous amount of diversity. We want to think about what that diversity means and how we honor that diversity. And then we want to think about our diversity too in a lot of small things. That goes back to soil microorganisms, to all the insects that are out there that are part of a complex ecosystem, to the birds that are dependent on those insects, and that's a main food source for them. So thinking about what is this complex system that we have, and it's not always the charismatic mega fauna, right? Or that term we just came up with, the charismatic mega flora. So the big trees. But how does that whole system work together, and how does it support things? And what is the importance of having it diverse? We want to think about, when our actions go with that lens, how are we making sure that we're keeping our environment safe and healthy for everybody who lives here? So if we're taking care of everything else, we're probably taking care of ourselves too, right? So it's going to be a healthy place to live. And then we want to think about what impacts we have on our changing climate. So how are we promoting soil sequestration of carbon? So soils actually sequester more carbon than the visible biomass. So taking care of this whole system, and understanding and appreciating the system, and knowing how we're doing our part to mitigate for or prevent any more climate change. So one of the things I think that we need to think about is that as we apply this lens, how are we looking at nature-based solutions? How are we taking what we see happening in natural systems, appreciating and understanding those natural systems, and then applying them to how we're managing and taking care of what we have in the land? So, and this has the list of doing those same things I just talked about: the biodiversity, protecting trees and biomass, appreciating soil. I think it's really important that we look at how we reduce and eliminate the use of all pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides. And then I think it's really important as a community that we think about what an integrated pest management plan really looks like for our community based on natural solutions. And then we need to think about, how does our infrastructure work? So if we're going to have it, how do we look at our infrastructure and have our infrastructure actually model what is happening with in a natural system? So do we have ways that we're retaining stormwater and stuff, and so that we're getting maximal groundwater recharge? Are we using landscaping to help cool and reduce energy dependence in our communities? How are we looking at that? Are we designing buildings to take advantage of passive solar and other ways that just make our community more resilient in the long run, and are actually working with the natural resources that we have? So as we move forward today, we want to remember to trust nature. Take a look, understand what's happening, and embrace the complexity of our urban ecosystem. We have a wonderful system here that works in so many ways. And how do we take what we have and really trust those natural processes, and think about, as a community that's working together, how do we work together to make sure that we maximize the effect of our natural resources that we value so much in this community? So that is what I would like us to be thinking about, is how do we do that? And you know, change is a part of things. We're going to have change. We have a lot of different things that we're going to be balancing. But as we think about how we have that change actually work to support our natural ecosystem is a pretty important part of it. So at finding that lens, that sustainability, you know, natural resource sustainability lens that we're going to be applying and thinking about how we make decisions is a hugely important part of how we want to move forward. So that quote I put up at the beginning from Robin Wall Kimmerer, who actually wrote a wonderful book called Braiding Sweetgrass. And if you haven't read it, I highly, highly advise that it's a very precious book. And she's a Native American who is also a PhD in ecology. So she has that science background. So we started off with knowing that you love that Earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the Earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. So what does it mean to have that reciprocity? To know that we're in a community that appreciates our natural resources and have that reciprocity that we know that land actually loves you back, right? So, so right now, at finishing what I have said, I'll ask very quickly, did anybody have any quick questions? How am I time on it? Okay. We're going to discuss how the Earth loves you back. But before that, out of anything I said, did anybody have any quick questions you want before we go out to discussions and kind of talk about that? Yeah, Craig. Well, nobody said it's going to be easy, you know, but I think looking at what that structure looks like in a community is exactly what we're doing. So I do believe the city is going to be looking, or we're going to encourage them. We're going to have a report on the urban forests. It's coming out pretty soon. That has been done, and the last time it was done, it was 2009. So we're going to have a report, and encouraging that report to have us look at our urban forest and community plan, and actually use that to develop a forest management plan, a community forest management plan. So I think that's something I wouldn't say it's in place. I would say there are other communities in European communities and stuff that have done a lot more than we've done so far. So we have models. So something that we want to think about today when we get to next steps. So I'm going to invite everybody to sit and talk at your table and think about, what is it? How do you know the Earth loves you back, right? What do you know? How do you know that?
We are going to wind down our conversations, and we're going to share what we discussed. Stephanie, I just wanted to make sure you didn't want to monitor this share out. Do you want me to take answers and stuff?
So if somebody want to share out something that you, how you know that, I cannot hear when you exactly call. So, anybody want to share out? Hey, Mike, how do you know the earth loves you back?
Shady, edible stuff from the garden.
Oh my goodness, so wildness and white truffles to shade and edibles, you know, so that we can actually go out and pick a salmon berry, right, when it gets ripe. So anybody from this table want to share with us? The rain came. Yep, the earth loves us back. How many people that smell, right? When you get the first, do you guys know that smell? Do you know it has a special name?
No.
Petrichor, which means heart of the earth.
Oh.
Petrichor. Yeah. So Petra is earth, core is heart. So
Oh.
earth heart. Yeah.
Ichor is also blood of the gods.
Okay. So
So like several people at our table came up really with the same idea. Walk together, rejuvenating,
there's that feeling that we get from being in and surrounded by natural settings. Yeah, that is really important. So yeah, anybody else have something they want to share? Come on, back there, your table. There you go. Okay, fruit trees, mushrooms. Okay, so hummingbirds and I was having a problem hearing. So earth provides. Oh, and just that the earth, that we know that the earth provides for us. Yeah. Okay, this table.
Talk a little bit about finding balance. So there's value in feel other people more appreciating the capital. There's a collective communal sense of other people.
So what they're talking about is finding a balance and then having that ability to actually share that feeling with other people. Did that capture it? Jack, thanks. Anybody else want to share? Yeah. So yeah, and I'm doing this for the people online. So it's that thing that we're one of, you know, many, many people. But you know what? You still have to have that feeling as an individual, right? Because those individuals, those feelings are compounded by the fact that we're one of many. So anybody else have anything they want to share?
Oxygen.
Okay, oxygen. Yeah. Thank God for photosynthesis, right? I mean, if photosynthesis hadn't evolved, life wouldn't be here, right? So you kind of had respiration going and eating up the stuff in the hot thin soup. And then photosynthesis came that actually could be replenishing what we needed. And yeah. So yeah, and one of the things we get then is oxygen for respiration, so that we can actually burn and use our food and get energy. So yeah, pretty cool system. So yeah.
Yeah, let's check to see if folks have.
Oh, I think, yeah.
I'm gonna check the chat first.
Do you want to read out what they had in the chat? Did they put theirs?
Oh,
Is that Betsy?
Hey Betsy, you wanna
can-
share?
oh, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes. Let me pull up the
Okay.
chat real quick.
Okay. How do we know the earth loves us? because of the contrast between man-made hardscape and natural settings, because of the diversity of species, because of the pure joy of being in nature, cycling or otherwise, because the earth provides for us, it feeds us all, because of a recollection as a child of having been mesmerized by the beauty of hummingbirds and bees, and because earth and heaven are one.
Okay, that was a pretty long list, you guys. What's nice is that we're going to capture some of this and everything will be shared out with everybody that came here. So is there anybody else from the online group that wants to share?
Sorry. Rick, I'm asking you to unmute. If you would like to turn your camera on and speak, otherwise we can put it in the chat if you like.
Maybe just read it in the chat.
Sure, just go ahead and read.
Thanks, Rick.
Sorry, I'm not seeing it in our main chat. Maybe it was in the small group chat. Would you mind copying and
I'll
pasting
tell you
it or
what,
reiterating it? Or
probably for time's sake, we're going to capture these and share them with everybody. Is that okay? Are you guys okay with that? We're struggling with our hybrid capability here.
we do want to make sure everyone's voice is heard though. So make sure you send us what you discussed in your small groups, and we'll send it out to everybody else after the summit's over.
I believe Mary has it.
Sorry, I'm still not seeing it.
Hi, Allie. I took notes for group 2 and they're pretty brief. I didn't see the instructions prior to the breakout. But anyway, Rick was describing beaver activity kind of for the first time in documented history near his home, close to Stafford and Rosemont. And I don't know if he wants to elaborate on that. Rick, would you like to elaborate on that?
It's not.
Oh, Stephanie and Jack and Mike have all been out here, and at some point in time they can relay it. It's just that first time in 122 years that it's been in our family that actually they've had some action of beavers on Pecan Creek, close to the urban growth boundary. So we always, yeah, I mean, we were floored by it. It's just kind of cool.
We used to get beaver come to Triumph Creek on a regular basis. It's pretty fun when you actually get that. And then they don't like culverts because you would find them being hit by cars. All of my beaver skins came. Yeah. So, okay, I think we need to, thank you, you guys. We're working on.
My name's Jack Halsey and I'm Executive Director with Oswego Lake Watershed Council. And today I'm going to be talking about reducing wildfire risk and promoting healthy and resilient landscape in Mountain Park. Up on the screen here, there's a photo of one of the natural areas in Mountain Park. And I thought this is kind of a good example of what a healthy second growth forest might look like. You have some Doug fir and some big leaf maple in there, and native understory and ground cover. So when the Watershed Council does projects, a lot of the initial stages are talking about a vision. And this is sort of our vision for what a healthy forest can look like. So before I talk about Mountain Park specifically, I wanted to elaborate a little bit on what Stephanie talked about earlier, and talk about vegetation and what the landscape looked like in the Lake Oswego area back in the 1850s. So this was around the time where there was a lot of European settlement and colonization happening, and displacement and violence against Native peoples. But this is sort of gives us a snapshot of what the vegetation looked like at that time. And this isn't very fine scale detail. Within these habitat types, there's of course a lot more diversity of plant composition. But you see the different colors across the screen, and the vegetation and the landscape sort of forms a mosaic of different ecologies. So we have closed and open forest, and within that forest land, yes. Okay. Right. So the dark green and light green are closed upland and woodland. Within that, we have things like Douglas fir, big leaf maple, Willamette Valley ponderosa pine, and Oregon white oak, all mixed into these forest systems. And some of the yellow and orange colors are Douglas fir savanna, Oregon white oak savanna, and we also have different types of prairie and wetland habitats. So within the Willamette Valley, we have a variety of different habitat types throughout the area, and this is the result of active management by Indigenous folks using cultural burns and also just cultivating the land in different ways. So we'll talk a little bit about that more later on, but I wanted to kind of set the context of because this previous management of the land by Indigenous folks has shaped the landscape we see today. Now, most or all of Lake Oswego was logged in the past 100 to 150 years. And so we don't really have mature old growth forest here anymore. A lot of what we see is secondary growth, where it's either what naturally regenerated after logging or something that was planted. But in Mountain Park HOA specifically, a lot of the age of the forest is 50 to 150-year-old forest. So with a second growth forest, there's potential challenges because when there's all this new vegetation growing in, different plants are competing for light, soil, and water resources. And in some cases, there's opportunities for active management to promote the growth of specific species or to help make this forest succession process occur in a faster or slower way. So as land managers, we have the opportunity to look at how the forest is growing on its own, and then think about ways we could intervene to change the way the forest is growing. And when we're doing this, we're also looking at the different layers of the canopy or of a forest. So there's canopy, mid-story, understory, forest floor, and soil. And then within these layers, there's also things like vines that climb throughout various layers of the forest. And then we also have root systems. So there's a lot of complexity in here. So the photo on the left here, that's Greg from our Lake Oswego Fire Department during the 2020 Clackamas fires. And I think for a lot of us, when those fires were coming in Clackamas County, it kind of hit home that, hey, maybe we should take a look at our landscape and resilience of the landscape, and what can we do to protect our community. With these fires, there's a lot of different things that could cause a fire, whether it's barbecue embers, cigarette butt, trailer chains dragging on the ground, or power lines. In the case of Mountain Park HOA, the power lines are all underground, which is a great benefit, but there's still risk of ignition. Or if a fire starts in one area and spreads to another area, that's another threat. So when those fires were happening, that brought a lot of attention statewide to, how can we manage our land more effectively, and how have changes in land management made wildfire risk worse, because this area used to be actively burned. A lot of our vegetation is adapted to low intensity, high frequency burns. But since we've stopped doing those practices, what can we do to help promote healthy vegetation but also reduce our risk of wildfire. Also wanted to point out that in 2017, Clackamas County did an assessment of where are the highest risk areas for wildfire, and also opportunities to do preventative and proactive work so that we can prepare the landscape before a fire happens. So Mountain Park was one of the neighborhoods in Lake Oswego that was identified as an area of interest. And we have several partners on this project. So at the beginning of, or at the end of 2021, the Watershed Council started talking with Oregon Department of Forestry and Mountain Park HOA, as well as some other partners, talking about opportunities for getting funding to actually do some vegetation work to reduce hazardous fuel loads and also meet some other goals of promoting healthy forest succession. And the fire department has also been a great partner on this. So we actually obtained funding from Oregon Department of Forestry to work with our partners to do a project. And Mountain Park HOA has been great on this. They have active committees that have been supporting this project. And they also have landscape staff that we've been working with. This is just a map of the project area. So the red boundaries kind of identify these different parcels within the homeowners association. And these parcels are common property. So it's owned collectively by HOA members. So here's a couple of photos of the types of vegetation that we might be concerned about. In Mountain Park, there's a lot of invasive species pressure, and there's been a lot of deferred maintenance where for decades, not much active management was done. And when invasive species come in, if you aren't actively managing for them, they can pretty quickly take over our native ecosystem. So we have things like English ivy growing up trees, and non-native clematis that also can grow up trees. In the foreground here, there's also English laurel, which is a really dense non-native shrub that can also be a hazard. And when we're looking at this from a fuels perspective, what's really concerning is ladder fuels. So if there's a fire that starts on the ground, if it can get up into the tree canopy, that's where that fire can really spread. So we're looking at opportunities to reduce those ladder fuels so that if a fire does start, it might burn low to the ground and not have an opportunity to get up into the canopy of the forest and then spread to homes. And once a fire gets into the canopy, it can send embers miles away. So that's definitely a concern. Another photo of some ivy here with blackberry in the front. Again, these non-natives, not only do they create ladder fuel issues, but these are also crowding out our native vegetation. So the ivy that's on these trees, if left unmanaged, the weight of that ivy can actually topple a tree, especially in the winter time if we have ice or snow. So it's a threat to our native vegetation here. And then blackberry does the same thing. If you've looked at a lot of our roadsides around the region or unmanaged areas, blackberry, non-native blackberry can really take over pretty quickly. And then a little bit more here on the right, there's actually English holly growing up there next to a Douglas fir tree. And it's about 30 feet tall. One unique thing about holly is when it gets hot, it excretes flammable oils. So if there was a fire scenario where there's a lot of heat around, the holly has the ability to basically combust pretty quickly. It can catch on fire and burn in a pretty flammable way. And when it's right up next to these native Doug fir trees, that presents an opportunity for fire to spread. So within this project, one thing we're really targeting is things like holly or also dead branches, English hawthorn, anything that is crowding out native vegetation tends to also be something we're looking at as a potential hazardous fuel. So another exciting thing about this project is we've had the opportunity to engage with youth So this past summer, we had 5 local high school students that we hired on for seasonal work. And part of this was an effort to do workforce development, but also an opportunity just to engage our local youth in learning about the environmental field, and also getting extra hands on board to deal with cutting some of this tree ivy, so we can start addressing those ladder fuels and invasives, and also working on doing some initial mapping work and prep. We've also been working with volunteers from the community. So this is one of our volunteers who came out a couple of weeks ago to help us with removing ivy from big leaf maple trees. And we have a number of other volunteers within the community that are starting to help us with removing tree ivy and other invasives. Here's another one of some hazardous vegetation that's actually really close to some structures. So we have blackberry and clematis and ivy all growing on a non-native hawthorn. So all of this, again, there's a fuel risk there, but it's also crowding out native vegetation. What we would want to see here on the stream instead are things like red twig dogwood, potentially willows. Western red cedar grows well in wetter, shadier riparian or streamside areas. And there's a lot of other native shrub species that would do a lot better here and present less of a fuel risk. So this is the type of fuel that we'll be removing. And this coming winter, we have crews from the Oregon Department of Forestry who are going to be working with us. Typically, these crews are seasonal. They're doing firefighting work. And then in the winter, they don't necessarily have employment with Oregon Department of Forestry. So this is a great opportunity to actually keep those folks on year round. They have the experience with managing vegetation and using chainsaws. So they're going to be working with us to come in and address the woody invasive shrubs and trees that are in Mountain Park. So we'll be removing holly, hawthorn, some laurels, and other non-native vegetation. And as they do this, we're also thinking about, once this invasive vegetation is cut out, what happens with that fuel? So with things like branches and small invasives, we'll be using a chipper. And the great thing here is when we create wood chips, that's basically giving food to our soil and protection to our soil. So we're able, if there is any bare ground while we're working out there, we'll be able to create wood chips to cover the bare ground, feed that soil, and that also gives habitat for different organisms, and we're keeping some of that local carbon right on site where it was cut from. And then when there are large logs, we're actually going to keep those because they're really beneficial for our soil and for habitat. So large logs will get in contact with the soil so that they can slowly decompose. So here's a salamander that we found in wood chips. There was a test plot where the HOA staff a couple of years ago removed the woody invasives and turned it into wood chips. And our first day out with the youth crew, I was telling them about wood chips and the benefits, and I just reached down and pulled this salamander out of the ground. So that's the type of thing that will live on that ground level. And then here's basically a mushroom growing out of a stick. So we're trying to keep that woody material, but we're trying to avoid scenarios where it's piled up or where that vegetation is hazardous. And here's a little bit of a vision for what we might see after fuel reduction. So we have healthy native understory here where it's lower growing. And on the right, there's actually a little bird in a snag or in a dead tree, and it's using that wood as habitat. So we're looking for opportunities to keep habitat features like snags in the landscape when they're not going to be a fire risk. And after all the work happens, we've done a lot already, but this winter will be really active. We're treating over 100 acres of hazardous fuels. So it's going to be a big effort. But after all that work's done, we're not going to be finished with the project. That's kind of the phase 1 site prep for this first year where we have funding. And now we're looking at, okay, what do we do in the next 5 years? What other invasives might need to be managed? When we are removing vegetation, we want to make sure that new weeds don't come back in. So we're looking at what can we plant in certain areas, what native seed can we put down to promote a healthy native understory. And then we're also in this management plan looking on a 50-year time scale over the next 50 years, what management actions can be done to continue promoting healthy forest succession. So I think that's about it for my first part on this. And I believe Ali is going to come up and talk a little bit more about this. Yeah, there's a question. Yeah, great question. So in terms of, so the question was, when we're removing invasive trees and dead trees and whatnot, how do we make sure we're complying with local regulations? So initially we had anticipated doing potentially more native tree removal. But in the context of this project, it turned out that really focusing on invasive trees and shrubs, because there are so many, that's going to get the bulk of the fuels reduced. So we're not removing any large native trees or anything like that. So from a permitting perspective, that helps a lot. So with this, it's mostly a matter of getting our invasive tree permits from the city of Lake Oswego, and they've been a great partner on helping us with that process. And we're also working with like the engineering department to make sure there aren't any erosion issues. So yeah, great question. Yeah. Yeah. So with the invasive tree permit, it is tree by tree. So we're actually marking every invasive tree over 6-inch diameter. So it's about 450 trees, I think, somewhere around there. So it is a big effort. But once we get that done, we don't have to do permits for the invasive trees that are smaller than 6-inch diameter. Another question. Yeah, so great question. The current project is focused on Mountain Park Homeowners Association within those boundaries. However, there may be opportunities to do peripheral projects as funding allows, but it's mostly focused on Mountain Park HOA. The funding is from Oregon Department of Forestry's Small Forest Land Grant Program. So it's funding for private property. And volunteer list, I can talk with you directly, or we have on our website contact info to sign up. What's that? Yeah. Either one. If you go on the Mountain Park website, they have a page, and we might have some resources here as well, some flyers. Thanks. All right, Alex. Yeah.
Just going back to Doug's question, you have a forest management plan under a tree code that cannot currently be applied to sensitive land. So hoping in the future you can do something change it to allow like park spaces, natural open spaces, to use the forest management plan that will help without going through all the training.
There is a resource enhancement plan option for permitting, which we've done on other projects, that does allow for removal of select native vegetation if it's for the benefit of the natural resource, which in this case it would be. But in this case, it made more sense to go with the invasive tree permit. But there's opportunities to improve that. Yeah.
So what does fuel reduction and resilient landscapes have to do with homeowners on their individual property? And just to kind of recap a little bit about what Jack was talking about in his presentation about how historically forests used to look different. They were patchy, they were kind of more of a mosaic with naturally occurring wildfires burning different patches of the forest and creating natural breaks to create to prevent bigger forest fires from occurring. And then indigenous peoples would also intentionally burn the land to enhance their food availability and quality. And then we started suppressing those fires and the forest filled in, and then we started urbanizing those areas. And we have a lot of what we call WI zones, wildland urban interfaces that are growing more and more by acreage each year. But what that means is that we, as people who live in these interface systems, we are just part of that ecology. What we do on that land impacts the overall ecology, and we can help promote resilient landscapes in turn. So yeah, what about our backyards? What can residents in Lake Oswego do to support resilient landscapes? I talked a little bit about the WI zones. It's the transition between wildland and developed land. And Mountain Park HOA is a good example, and there are other really good examples in Lake Oswego. CAR just means communities at risk, and in that Clackamas County plan that Jack mentioned, there were some other areas of Lake Oswego that were identified by the fire department as communities at risk for a number of different reasons. One of those being need for defensible space around houses, access limitations, lack of available water, heavy fuel loads in those common lands, a number of different reasons. So one thing that homeowners can do to address some of these things is creating a defensible space, which is an area around your home that reduces the fire intensity and gives firefighters, if there's a case of a severe wildfire in that area, it will give firefighters space to do their job, and they will be able to defend your home. And this photo right here is Greg. He's doing a home assessment in Mountain Park, and he is just demonstrating, keeping vegetation back a certain amount of feet to create that defensible space. And so one of those resources that Lake Oswego residents can take advantage of is that the fire department offers these assessments that you can request, where an employee like Greg will come to your residence and give you very specific recommendations tailored to the landscape of your home, that the species that are growing, and give you a summary at the end of it. And they are just recommendations that you can apply to your day-to-day landscaping management and just sort of embed into what you're already doing, and to create those defensible spaces and make your homes more fire adapted. And so someone in the audience mentioned Firewise, and this is a national program that is sort of just like a neighborhood grassroots, community-led sort of program that promotes wildfire resilience on the homeowner level. And it's pretty straightforward. You form them within your own neighborhoods. You just need a minimum of 8 dwelling units kind of centered around each other, so like a cul-de-sac or a couple of streets, but it can go as high as like 500 residents. And the whole idea is that you talk to your local fire department. You work with your local fire department, Watershed Council, Oregon Department of Forestry, and you do an assessment of your community to see what sort of steps need to be taken to create more defensible space, reduce some of those fuel loads on private property. And you create an action plan, and you apply, and you can, and if you're accepted, you become Firewise accredited. And there are a few different benefits to becoming Firewise accredited. It's a really good model. It's a national model that can be tailored to the local neighborhood level for creating defensible spaces and those action items that you can do seasonally and do as a community. And it's a place where homeowners can voice their concerns about wildfire risks, being Firewise accredited makes you eligible for certain grants and funding that you can then use for like wood chippers or to fund some of the projects that you do on your own land. It helps you build relationships with the fire department, your soil water conservation districts, watershed councils, ODF. It kind of just creates like a consistent stream of communication between everybody. And it also just promotes a lot of outreach around resilient landscapes and wildfire risk education. There's a lot of existing educational resources around it. And it just kind of is a grassroots program. It just brings the community around one goal, which is to promote resilient landscapes and make sure that wildfire isn't spreading from house to house. And then it can also act as an example for other neighborhoods in Lake Oswego and other neighborhoods in the Willamette Valley. And it's Lake Oswego Fire Department endorsed. Don Johnson is a big fan of it. It makes firefighters' jobs a lot easier. And in kind of a way, it's reciprocal because firefighters are, when there is a severe wildfire, they are going into your neighborhood, and it makes their jobs a lot easier when you've taken these actions to make it so that your house can be saved and like there are accessible routes, and just kind of a reciprocal relationship there. So you might have even heard of Firewise before, and maybe you've even heard that one of the requirements is that you have to cut down all of the trees in your front yard, backyard, up to like 10 to 20 feet. That's not necessarily what that means. One of the beautiful things about Firewise is that, like I said, it's tailored to your individual house. It's tailored to the landscape around your house. Every neighborhood is different, and that's why you work so closely with the fire department. And then you can also offer up your own, you also have a voice in that. And at the end of the day, they're just recommendations. And some of those recommendations really, here's one of them, is you just want to prune overhanging branches so that they're not touching your roof. You want to clear out your gutters. Sorry, I thought I had one of Greg moving firewood, but they're at one of the assessments that I visited with Greg, it was literally just moving firewood from right next to your house to a little bit farther away to the other side of the fence. It's also kind of just goes hand in hand with good landscape best practices in general. When you are removing those invasive species and reducing those fuel loads, it allows other species to grow in its place, often native species. And you can also plant more climate resistant, fire adapted species as well. I just have snowberry and Douglas spirea there for examples, but so you're doing good regardless. Oh, here is the photo of Greg moving the firewood away. Promotes the entire urban ecosystem benefits and land resiliency. There are a lot of other communities in this area who are also undergoing the Firewise community program and have been Firewise accredited, including Forest Park. Sunburst is in Westland. I'm trying to remember the exact amount of official Firewise accredited communities just in Clackamas County. There are a lot, and there are more every year. And it really just starts with talking to your neighbors, your adjacent neighbors, and you don't have to request a WI assessment, but you do need to talk to your fire department about performing like an overall community assessment. So it doesn't need to be individual assessments, but it really just starts with talking to your neighbors and forming kind of an action committee that you can start these steps. And so you get the recommendations from the fire department, and they will give you a recommendation plan. And then you can talk to your watershed, so you can talk to me, and I can help you with the application process and get it all listed out. And then that comes down to carrying out those steps. It's 100 hours a year. Invasive species removal or clearing out your gutters counts, like going to educational events count something like the tree summit towards those 100 hours that is on a community level. And yeah, you have support between the Watershed Council, ODF, the fire department, and Mountain Park is just one of the first neighborhoods that we are kind of trying this out and garnering interest in. Does anyone have any more questions for Jack or me about Firewise or overall Mountain Park land resilience program? We'll reconvene at 11:10, and I encourage you to go visit our community tables and help yourself to refreshments. And we'll see you back in 10 minutes.
We're going to wrap up the break, please. If you can hear me, raise your hand, please. Thank you. We're gonna all go ahead and sit down now and get going with the rest of the presentation. Thank you. Wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here while folks finish up. So I wanted to share with everyone a project that we've been doing since about 2018. So we're 4 years into this project, and it's the Westlake Oak project. And I'm excited to share this because this project we've really done a lot of work on. It's been a long-term commitment, and I wanted to kind of share the level of detail that some of these projects get into, and some of the exciting things that we have going on at Westlake. Mary, is the video fine? Okay, great. So right here, this is Westlake Oak Woodland. You might recognize this view. It's right along Cruz Way in the Westlake neighborhood. And I like this photo because you have the little Westlake sign there. But these trees that are there, those are Oregon white oak trees. And Oregon white oak are actually a really special tree. You can find them from Northern California all the way to Canada, but Oregon is really where these trees thrive. And so oaks are a really special tree. They have a lot of cultural significance. Oak is one of those species that indigenous people have been actively managing as far back as anyone can remember. And oaks are special because they provide food resources for people and for wildlife. And they're also a keystone species. So if you have a mature Oregon white oak tree, even just one, that can support hundreds of other species because their symbiotic relationships, fungal networks can connect other plants through the soil and through roots to these trees. So they're really special. These specific trees, these are down in Monroe or Alpine, Oregon, kind of between Corvallis and Eugene. And this is where my grandparents live. So growing up in Oregon, I used to go out to their property and spend time with these trees. So I personally have a connection to them. This is more of a oak savanna or oak prairie, which is a grassland ecosystem with native grasses and wildflowers, and then some scattered Oregon white oak trees. And these are pretty mature. They're quite large. So for me, when I think of Oregon white oak, I think of these trees first. So what else is important about oak? So one thing to know is that in the Willamette Valley, we've lost most of our oak habitat. For oak prairie and savanna, we've lost 98% approximately in the Willamette Valley. And for oak woodlands, we've lost about 85%. So in the Willamette Valley, we've lost the vast majority of our oak habitat. And it's one of the most culturally significant trees in our region. And internationally, oaks are special. There's a lot of different types of oak trees, but Oregon white oak is really important for the Willamette Valley. One of the major threats for oaks is development. So I have a photo here from Oregon City area where they have this amazing mature Oregon white oak, and there's a shed right up to it, but that oak is still providing habitat for birds. It's still surviving. But development, agriculture, and changes in land use and forestry practices, because of all that, we've lost a lot of these oaks. The good news is there still are mature oaks and young juvenile oaks throughout the Willamette Valley, and in Clackamas specifically, and in Lake Oswego, we still have habitat cores of Oregon white oak. They are adapted to the rocky, well-draining soil that you see at like Iron Mountain Park, for instance. And then Westlake HOA, this is another homeowners association within Lake Oswego. I believe there are about 300 residences there, as well as several apartment complexes. So there's a lot of community members living in this area. And Westlake, when this was developed in the 70s, they already knew that this was a habitat core for Oregon white oak. There were some mature oaks here. Unfortunately, with land use and development, they did put housing into a lot of this. So a lot of those oaks were removed. But the good news is along a lot of our stream sides and wetland areas, those habitat cores remain. And so we still have remnant oak. Some of these oak are more than 150 years old. So they were here pre-settlement. And this large one, that's one of the largest oaks at Westlake, and it's probably at least 200 years old. Could be much older than that. Oaks can grow for many hundreds of years. The other photo, kind of the landscape view, that's from drone photography from Foresight Drones. They're an organization that donated their time to do some monitoring work for us, and we also got some cool photos out of it. You can see the Cruise Woods or Cruise Oaks Business Park back there, and you can almost see I-5 from here. So we have oak habitat right in the middle of an urban and suburban environment. So as early as 1999, the Westlake HOA began commissioning studies of this area to figure out how can they manage these resources. And in 2017, they came back to this issue, really trying to figure out, okay, we have these old management plans, but we haven't made a lot of progress on them, and we need to reassess. So the HOA hired Ash Creek Forestry, and they did an updated forest management plan for Westlake. And some of the problems identified here, English ivy, which is pretty common. It's really crowding out the entire ground cover, creating a monoculture or an ivy desert. And you can see it's also growing up the vegetation. So it's already crowding out these trees. There's not much native shrub layer there. You can see the stream corridor, that's this is Center Point Creek tributary, which flows into Carter Creek, which then flows into the Tualatin River. And there's lamprey in Carter Creek. And other culturally significant fish species. But you can see in this photo, this was from 2017, the stream bank is pretty degraded. It's dominated by ivy and non-native blackberry. So there's erosion issues, there's a lack of shade in some areas. And then where you see the red circle on the screen, that's identifying all the English hawthorn that's growing in the understory. So because this area historically was burned, which created more open oak systems. Oak need a lot of light. This English hawthorn is crowding out the understory so that oak seedlings can't regenerate on their own. So basically, in this case, the biggest problem was invasive species, but then a secondary issue was, there isn't active management being done. but these ecosystems have been cultivated for millennia and they can't survive without intervention. So this is a case where, you know, if we want to retain oaks, we have to actively manage for them. Specifically at Westlake, there's an interesting growth pattern, and part of this is because of altered hydrology from development. Part of it is from past logging in the area. But we have Oregon ash growing alongside Oregon white oak. Ash are faster growing than oak. In some areas, like on streamside corridors or wetlands, it's dominantly ash, and those are healthy, currently healthy ash populations with emergent wetland. But there's some drier areas on the site. If you walk throughout the woods, you might only be a foot higher than a wetland area, but the soil is much drier. So in these conditions, the ash are competing with the oak for resources. And so these oak have kind of a Q-tip shaped growth where they have a really long, tall trunk and then a little bit of vegetation up on the top. But those oak, the growth of the oak, it's not going to turn into a mature open growing oak. And so there's some issues with that. So one thing we're looking at is, are there opportunities to do treatments on the ash, either removal or creating habitat snags in order to address this? Yeah, question? I'm well aware. I'm gonna get to that later on. The comment was that Oregon ash is doomed. So there is a non-native insect, emerald ash borer, that in the next 20 years, it's anticipated we'll lose 99% of our Oregon ash. Back in 2018, we knew that that was in the future, but this year, emerald ash borer was discovered. So now we know, okay, in the next 20 years, we're going to lose our ash. But at the time, we were looking at, okay, in the short term, in terms of management, how can we begin the process of creating more space for oaks to grow? Here's a little bit more information on different types of oak ecosystems. So there's oak savanna versus woodland. There's open and closed woodland. There's oak forest. There's also riparian oak ecosystems. And within Westlake, we have, again, a mosaic of different types of habitats. But currently, it's predominantly oak woodland closed, and there are also open areas. There's also a lot of riparian oak. And riparian means streamside, so streamside oak. And so from that Ash Creek plan, they identified some of the main wetland areas, the stream corridor, as well as existing openings in the canopy. And so this helped us for planning future management on what do we already have and what do we want to create. You'll notice there's this large parcel outlined by red, and there's an orange and yellow parcel. When we started off, we're focusing on the largest 17-acre tract, but currently we're actually expanding to these other two smaller parcels with funding from Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund. And so we're looking at expanding our efforts to improve habitat connectivity, because in this area, there's a lot of fragmentation, and every little patch of oak, every individual oak tree builds the larger regional network of oak connectivity. We also identified a desired future condition in that management plan. So Oregon white oak being the dominant overstory with some canopy openings, ground covered by native herbaceous vegetation, small forested wetlands that are managed for unique plant communities, and then dense native shrubs as buffers on edges of canopy corridors. So how do we get there? Stephanie touched on this earlier, the value of healthy ecological systems and trusting nature to do the work for us. So throughout this process, we're considering soil, stormwater, shade for our streams, habitat. When I talk about habitat, here's a couple examples. There's a snag with woodpecker activity, probably downy woodpecker, potentially. There's an old rotted out stump where there might be a potential opportunity for nesting or a den or that sort of thing. Also mature oak canopy. We're also looking at aesthetic and cultural value. So aesthetics being things like, the residents and people walking on sidewalks in the area can benefit from these trees. They can smell it, they can see the wildlife, they can potentially forage from native berries that are growing in the area. We're also looking at nesting opportunities for threatened species like white-breasted nuthatch, I believe is the one I'm thinking of. I have a chart on that later on. But to do all of this, we're also trying to create conditions for oaks to be able to continue to mature. So there's the white-breasted nuthatch that I mentioned. And here's, on the right, you see some cavities, and this is a dead oak branch in a mature oak tree. So it's a pretty specific thing. And there are several bird species that specifically need a dead branch or dead cavity within a mature oak. So it's pretty specific habitat conditions that they need. Like I mentioned, we have wetland areas, so there's Pacific tree frog, which is on our logo. By the way, almost all these photos I took out at Westlake, so these are frogs that are out in the wetland. And then 2 different species of salamander. If anyone knows Gabe Shoeships with Friends of Tryon Creek, we were out in the woods and he picked up a log and found one of these salamanders just sitting there. So we're looking at, providing wood and leafy material for amphibians. So we started this project. The first place we start on restoration projects is removing the tree ivy. And to do this, we cut basically an air gap so that the ivy on the ground can't feed the ivy up in the tree. And so by cutting this ivy around a tree, the top vegetation will die off and the tree has less weight on it and is not competing for soil and light as much. We worked with a number of volunteers on this project. And this is over the course of 4 years. So we didn't go in and clear everything at once. We slowly went through and cleared small patches of invasive species, cut the ivy, manually dug it up, and also used herbicide in some cases to treat different invasives. So we're using mechanical methods, manual methods, herbicides, and with some weeds, like tansy ragwort, for instance, we actually have biocontrols out there, little caterpillars that are eating certain weeds. So we're trying to use every possible method for removing these weeds. We also worked with a number of contractors. So this crew out here is digging blackberry out of a wetland area. This is a workforce development crew with Wisdom of the Elders. So it's a Native American crew who utilizes traditional ecological knowledge to do habitat enhancement work. And they've been involved with the project from the beginning. We haven't done as much work with them in the past couple of years because their internship program took a pause with COVID issues. But we're going out next week to work on digging blackberry out of a camas meadow at Westlake. So we're still working with them and they're really knowledgeable and great to work with. Here's some other volunteers. You can see Mike and Jim in the largest photo pulling ivy. We have a puppy there helping out. We have some students from Lake Ridge and Lake Oswego high schools getting service hours by removing ivy in the wintertime. Yeah. Okay, I'll speed it up. More volunteer photos. We did a lot of trash removal, several tons of trash removed from this parcel. So there's a soda cup next to a Pacific trillium. And as we remove the ivy and other weeds, the seed bank, the seeds that were already in the soil, all rebounded. So we have fringe cup, lupin, trillium, candy flower, camas, a number of native wildflowers, all rebounding as soon as we move that ivy. There's also oak seedlings coming up. And then we did a lot of planting. So we utilized live stakes, we utilized wetland plugs. We had gallon pots as well that we installed. And this is all to fill in certain areas. So our wetland areas where we had removed ivy, that needed extra attention with replanting. Streamside areas, there wasn't much natural regeneration, but certain parts of the woods, we didn't have to plant anything. It was already growing back with native plants on its own. And when we do planting, we also took care of those plantings by trying to water them in the summer and clear weeds around them. So we worked with some interns and volunteers on that. The other layer of this, which I'll try to speed it up here, is looking at those opportunities for oak release, where we take out a competing tree that's not an oak to give more space for the oaks to grow. So this is our arborist Brian and our forester Matt out in a camas meadow looking at trees. Like I said, we use drone photography to do data monitoring. So this is a high resolution orthomosaic image from thousands of photos that's all compiled together. We also were able to create a 3D model of the tree canopy here for monitoring. And this is kind of showing tree heights here. And through this process, we basically went tree by tree, at pretty much every tree in the woods, and identifying what treatments could we do to improve the specific growing conditions for the oaks. So we did marking of these trees. Here's a map. You'll see down at the bottom, there's a number of different treatment types, which I'll talk about here. We didn't just want to cut every ash tree. That's not what the project was. There's really selective treatments on a tree by tree basis, going through this whole area and saying, you know, what can we do to improve the health of these oaks? So we ended up working with our arborists over a couple of years to do different treatments. Here, they're doing some felling work, so they're actually cutting ash. I've lost a photo on here, but with the arrow, there's an example of one specific ash tree that we ended up cutting out. And then this is a girdling treatment here, where they basically cut the bark of the tree to create a snag. So that tree can still stay there for habitat for wildlife while not competing with those oaks anymore. And our arborists were really good climbers, which is important for this project. We had a number of crown reduction or fracture treatments where they selectively cut certain branches. So instead of removing the whole ash tree, they could just cut out a branch to create enough shade or create enough light for oaks to create new branching. And our arborists were also really skilled ecologists. So while they're out, they're keeping in mind, you can't read this, but it's basically a bird list. I'm talking about the types of cavities they might need, the types of conditions they need. So our arborists have a detailed knowledge of ecology, so they're able to go out and really do really specific treatments. We're also monitoring things like mushrooms, oak regeneration, bird nesting. There's a hummingbird here too. And this is from last fall, huge crop of acorns that are actually germinating and turning into oak seedlings. So we're looking at the mature trees that are already growing, but also creating opportunities for natural regeneration. And so we have wildflowers, osoberry, different trilliums and camas coming up. And to give you a sense for the monitoring we're doing, this is 690 observations of wildlife or plants or fungi and 162 unique species within 17 acres. So there's a huge amount of biodiversity. And this is just what we've photographed. There's, you know, probably hundreds more species in that area that we haven't seen yet. And then we've done public engagement, just leading tours for the public. And here's some before and after photos, just of the change in vegetation over time. And we'll continue monitoring this as we move on to the new tracks, but we're continuing maintenance on this area that we've already worked on, and then working to expand to other oaks within the neighborhood, but also oaks within Lake Oswego. So helping folks understand the value of their oaks. And with this project so far, restored 500 feet, or sorry, 5,000 feet of stream bank, or 2,500 if you're just counting one side, over 1,500 volunteer hours, 2,500 native plants installed. So it's really been a community effort, and we're excited to keep building a culture around appreciating our oaks and actively managing so that they can turn into mature oaks to support more wildlife. That's it. And are we doing questions or moving on to the next?
Maybe take two questions, two short questions.
So are you propagating oaks to stuff back in, or are you just trying to maintain what comes up on its own?
So the question was, are we propagating oaks? We planted about 50 oaks in areas where there wasn't natural regeneration happening. Other than that, all the regeneration you saw was naturally occurring. And then on the table over here, I have a pot where we have a volunteer, Dorothy, who pots up acorns in her backyard and donates those gallon pots to us. So we're doing that as well. Yeah, great.
Well-designed, I hope, well-considered goals or objectives. Without that,
yeah,
of course, then fails.
So the comment was that it was really important to have well-designed objectives and goals in this process. Yeah.
2 years ago, we participated in and we go for hikes all the time, we see the trees. Irrigation, so that they can be watered. Are they gonna always have to be watered, or is there a period of time where they can go around?
Yeah. So the comment and question was, there was community planting events with Friends of Trees and Lake Oswego Parks and Rec at Lusher Farm and the Rotary Club. And they planted oaks, and now there's irrigation installed. So for oaks, establishment irrigation can help for the first 1 to 2 years. But once an oak is established and its roots have started, I personally would recommend not doing any irrigation. In talking with our arborists, the biggest threat to Oregon white oaks beyond like development and whatnot, the biggest ecological threat is armillaria, which is a fungus, and it needs wet conditions to thrive. So if your oak roots, especially for mature oaks and juvenile, but if the roots are wet all summer, then that creates conditions where that root rot can thrive. So we would recommend no irrigation for mature oaks. All right.
So yeah, you're going to be hearing a lot more about Oregon white oaks. There's a lot of community stakeholders that really are just galvanizing around Oregon white oak protection, and it's just such a complex species with a very complex habitat. And we want. So the urban forest committees came out with an idea from a previous tree summit, and all the tree summits since then really have been a labor of love by the urban forest committees. And there's 10 or so members here who helped plan this event. And the idea behind this tree summit was that we would have more localized neighborhood specific conversations about next steps we could take on the neighborhood level. And we didn't necessarily we were gonna have everyone sit with their neighborhoods in the second half, and we weren't able to get to that. But regardless, I'd like to share out some of the things that our urban forest communities have been doing this year, and then talk about things we can do within our neighborhoods in the following year. In this past Arbor Month, our urban forest committee members had a program in which residents of Lake Oswego could apply to have a volunteer come to their home to help them with their tree ivy. And so we had some urban forest committee members go out to different homes and educate on tree ivy removal, why invasive ivy is such a problem, and just really congregate with their neighbors over some of these invasive species removal issues. The urban forest committees had a couple of different tree ivy poles at the Adult Community Center and George Rogers Park. I think they got somewhere between 26 altogether between those 3 events, 26 different people in the community to help them out with this. And I can't remember how many trees they were able to pull ivy from, but it was a really good example of how you can mobilize residents around certain public areas and bring awareness around these issues. And something we're working on right now is Leave the Leaves, and you might have heard of it. The idea behind it is that instead of using gas-powered leaf blowers or just raking up your leaves all together and bagging them and taking them to the landfill, you leave them in place and let them mulch your soil. And it provides a lot of good nutrients for the microbial life, and it also provides habitat for overwintering insects. And it just gets us away from using gas-powered lawn equipment. And there's a couple, we have a whole webpage about different ways you can tailor the Leave the Leaves thing to your specific gardening needs. You can put them in your garden beds. You can shred them in certain instances. And we have, and the whole idea actually came from Xerces Society, which is a macroinvertebrate organization that's local. And we just wanted to take their idea and promote it in Lake Oswego. So we are asking attendees of this tree summit to try it out and take the pledge and try leaving the leaves in their place this fall. And we have some signs too, if you like to put them in your yard and talk to your neighbors about it. And a couple, the reasoning behind leaving your leaves. And another thing we'd like to ask you to do is consider joining your neighborhood urban forest committees. Our members are going to stick around for a couple of minutes after the summit, and I'll have signs with the neighborhood names, and you can talk to them a little bit about their work. The members just come from a variety of backgrounds. We have a lot of tree committee people. We have people who work with the friends groups, and just people that really care about the environment here and have been really passionate about its protection and organizing campaigns and educational resources to provide to their neighbors. And one of the selling points, I think, is that it's just a very neighbor to neighbor connection, and just kind of understanding where other people are coming from and listening to their perspectives and sharing where you're coming from. Some other ways that you can get involved after this tree summit. The Watershed Council has some committees. We have an education outreach committee that I head, and we just we coordinate programs with schools and other areas of Lake Oswego. Soil Your Undies is one of our campaigns that is around exploring soil science and microbial life, and just really fostering and nurturing the life that is beneath us as well as above us. And we have a stewardship committee that tackles a lot of some of the private land, the work we do on private land. We have an equity action team. We just, Stephanie mentioned in her opening presentation, the land acknowledgement. Those are some of the things we work on, land-based, reconnecting with indigenous tribes and learning from them, and exploring different worldviews we can incorporate aside from the sort of Western ideals that we've been using for a long time. We are also in the process of forming a land use committee, which will be sort of like an advisory committee that tackles some of the land use issues around like tree removals and development and stuff like that. We talked about Firewise. Talk to your neighbors about potentially forming a Firewise committee. Talk to me if you'd like me to go out to your neighbor, talk to your neighbors, and develop some next steps and some action plans behind that. Talk to your neighborhood tree committee about type 2 permit application comments. Engage with your community partners. The Watershed Council, we partner with the Clackamas Soil and Watershed Conservation District, the city of Lake Oswego. Backyard Habitat's a really great resource. Greg at the fire department's a really great resource. And then we just have numerous volunteer opportunities at the 2 projects that Jack talked about today, Westlake and Mountain Park, as well as some other ones. And so you can email him to get on our volunteer list and learn more about those opportunities. Stephanie, would you like to say anything more before our last discussion question?
No, just, we really want to get ideas from people about how you want to get involved, you know, what are the next steps. And then thinking about how we can help maybe get that organized to move forward. We're way behind on time. Don't have very much time. So if very quickly you do that, and I just want to say, before you go out here, share an idea with the person writing things down at your table, and we're going to capture that and share everything you got written down so everybody can see it. And just thank you all for being a part of this. Yeah, because it does take community to support every single person in the community is part of that work.
So talk to your table neighbors about different roles you might have in the urban forest and next steps you'd like to take, and then also what you would like to see and how the Watershed Council can support. And maybe we won't do a share out for this one, but please write things down so that we have it for reference. And 5 minutes. Thanks for coming, everybody. I hope you have a good rest of your weekend and you stay dry out there.